My nephews robbed me, so I called the police. Turns out, they had been terrorizing the entire neighborhood. My sister defended them, but they still got what they deserved. When I got home from work, I immediately noticed something was off the door. To my shed was wide open, and the padlock was busted. Before this, I had stored a bunch of bags filled with empty soda cans inside. I drink a lot of soda, so I had collected quite a stash, planning to cash them in at the recycling center. But it wasn't just the cans that were missing. I also realized that my gardening tools, a machete, and a full gas canister were gone. I checked the security camera footage and saw that early in the morning, right after I had left for work, 3 of my nephews broke into the shed by smashing the lock with a hammer. Furious, I called my sister, but she and her husband flat out denied that their kids could have done something like that until I showed up at their house with the footage. Their anger quickly shifted from me to their kids once they saw the video. The boys had not only stolen from me, but had also skipped school to do it. I managed to recover most of my things, though the gas canister was empty and the cans were already sold. I demanded the money back for the cans, but the little thieves had already blown everything on video games and junk food. When I asked how much they had made, they admitted to getting nearly $200 for the cans. So I told my sister she now owed me over $200, covering both the stolen cans and my broken lock. At first, my sister and her husband were mad at the kids, but soon their frustration turned toward me. They started making excuses for them, saying I knew they had 3 kids and were struggling with a mortgage. I made it simple. Either they paid me back, or I was going to the police. They told me to get lost. I told them they had 2 days before I filed a report. This wasn't even the first time my nephews had stolen from me. That's why I installed security cameras in the first place. What they did was absolutely wrong, but I also knew my sister and her husband couldn't afford to pay me back. Still, that wasn't my problem. Soon after, they started bombarding me with messages, calling me heartless for putting them in such a difficult position, especially right after the holidays. Update 1. This morning, I had enough. I went to the police. Before that, I tried calling my sister and her husband one last time, hoping to work something out, but they refused to even discuss repaying me. Instead, they blamed me for leaving the cans in the shed in the first place, saying I had practically tempted the boys with easy money. That was the final straw. After I hung up, my oldest nephew sent me a picture of himself holding a soda can while flipping me off. That was it. I went straight to the station and filed an official report. I gave the cops everything: the video footage, the broken lock, and screenshots of all the messages, including the one with the middle finger. They documented everything as evidence. I don't know if my nephews have been arrested yet, but the officers assured me it was going to happen. Maybe some community service will knock some sense into them. I also mentioned my concern about them taking the machete, but the police categorized it as just another tool, given that they had also stolen several other things. In total, they took gardening shears, steel rakes, 2 shovels, one of them a foldable camping shovel, a full 8-liter gas can, a cheap electric drill I got for $5, a hedge trimmer, and a small electric chainsaw. Strangely, they left behind the lawnmower, weed trimmer, extension cords, and an old radio. I have no clue why they picked those specific items. Maybe they thought they could resell them. I got most of my stuff back, except for the gas. No idea what they did with it. After the break-in, they carried out as much as they could by hand, then returned with some carts probably stolen to haul away the rest. It took them multiple trips to clear out all the cans, and they didn't even bother closing the shed door afterward. Now, my nephews are facing charges for trespassing and theft. I'm sure my phone is going to blow up with messages when the cops show up at their door, but I don't care anymore. Whether or not I get my money back is irrelevant at this point. My sister and her husband had their chance. I've already replaced the shed's lock with a much sturdier one, and the machete won't be kept there anymore. I also spoke with some neighbors about what happened, and it turns out that soda cans have been disappearing around the area lately. If someone left a bag of cans out in the open, it would get stolen. I can't say for sure if my nephews were responsible, but if they were, that means they had been doing this for months. I also talked to some other relatives, and honestly, they're just as fed up with my sister and her husband as I am. At least my family is on my side. That's a relief. I was worried they'd turn against me for reporting my nephews to the police, but instead, I got responses like, "Good job," and "It's about time those kids faced some real consequences." Turns out, I wasn't the only one they had stolen from. A lot of people suggested that I should have made my nephews work off the $200 they stole, but there was no way in hell I was going to do that. Those little brats hate any form of labor. They would have just stood around whining about how unfair the world is, and I'd have to supervise them the whole time, which is the last thing I want to deal with. Besides, I banned them from coming to my house for a reason. It all started with them stealing snacks and food, then escalated to DVDs and video games. That's when I started marking my stuff with a permanent marker initials on game cases, movie discs, so I could prove what was mine when they inevitably tried to swipe it. Of course, every time I caught them, they'd throw out excuses like, "Oh, but you said we could borrow it," which was always a blatant lie. I'd make them return whatever they took, but every single time, they acted like I was the one being unreasonable. Their apologies were some of the most fake, insincere bullshit I've ever heard. The final straw? They used a spare key to sneak into my house while I wasn't home. They raided my fridge, stole 3 packs of my favorite beer, and cleaned out my kitchen, taking whatever snacks they wanted. One of them even had the audacity to take a dump in my bathroom and not flush, and if that wasn't enough, they pissed all over the floor on purpose. When I confronted them, they denied everything, but the stolen beer was found in their room. Did my sister and her husband punish them? Barely. All they said was, "Boys will be boys." And then they had the nerve to get mad at me when I told them their kids weren't welcome in my house anymore. That's when I installed the security cameras, but I never told anyone about them. That decision turned out to be a smart one because my nephews clearly assumed I was an easy target. When I have the extra money, I plan on installing even more cameras inside my house. Update 2. Well, my nephews really did get arrested. On Saturday, the cops showed up at their house with a warrant, and my sister and her husband had no choice but to let them in. Apparently, those cocky little punks turned into sobbing children the moment the handcuffs came out. I know this because my neighbor, who's friendly with my sister, saw the whole thing happen. Shortly after the arrest, my sister and her husband started spamming my phone again. They couldn't bail the kids out until Monday morning, and now their boys are officially facing charges for theft, intentional property damage, and vandalism. The police took this seriously, especially since complaints about my nephews had been piling up for months. For a while now, bags of soda cans had been vanishing all over the neighborhood. I can't say for certain that my nephews were responsible for all of it, but let's just say they're prime suspects. Now that word of their arrest is spreading, I hope other neighbors with security cameras come forward with more footage. Then my sister and her husband had the audacity to show up at my house. I refused to open the door and told them point blank that this entire mess was their fault for raising entitled little criminals and never holding them accountable. They started yelling and pounding on my door even harder until I threatened to call the cops again. Since they knew I wasn't bluffing, they finally left, but that didn't stop the flood of angry messages. I haven't blocked them. Instead, I've been saving everything because I plan to take them to small claims court. It's not about the money. I've already replaced the broken lock with a much stronger one. This is about making a point. I want them to feel the consequences of their own neglect. The best part? My entire family is backing me up. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone is fed up with my sister and her husband. A lot of them had also been stolen from by those kids. After I banned my nephews from my house, some of my relatives followed my lead and did the same. I'm also going to push for my nephews to get sentenced to community service. Not just because it's a fitting punishment, but because I know they're going to hate it. Whenever they're forced to do something they don't like, they just stand around, complain, and act like the entire world is against them. They never actually do anything. Maybe a few hundred hours of unpaid labor will finally teach them some respect. They've been spoiled for way too long. Update 3. I honestly thought my sister and Bill would keep being stubborn after everything that happened, but they finally caved. I had filed a small claims lawsuit against them for their kids' actions. I was suing them for $500, which covered the stolen cans, the broken lock, the cost of replacing it with a much stronger one, the filing fees, and the mental stress from dealing with this whole mess. My best friend's father is a lawyer, and he gave me a free consultation. He told me I had an airtight case. I had security footage of my nephews breaking into my shed, videos of my sister and Bill banging on my door, plus all of their angry messages as evidence. When my sister and Bill got served with the court papers, they freaked out. They called me in a panic, saying I couldn't do this to them. I calmly replied that this was the price they had to pay for failing as parents and raising spoiled little thieves. I told them the next time we talked, it would either be in court or after they handed over the $500. Then I hung up. Last night, I was just chilling with some friends, watching a movie, when I heard a knock at the door. I checked, and there they were, my sister and Bill, looking absolutely miserable. I opened the door but left the screen door locked. They said they were tired of fighting, that everyone had turned against them, and that they fully admitted they had messed up badly. They just wanted to make peace. My friends were standing behind me, so they were witnesses to everything. Bill pulled out an envelope with $500 in cash, all in $50 bills. He said it was from his personal savings and promised that their kids would finally get the punishment they deserved. They didn't ask me to drop the charges, but they begged me to show leniency. I told them I only wanted community service for my nephews, which was honestly a very light punishment. If we worked together, I was sure the judge would agree. They sighed in relief and agreed. Then they left without making a scene. My friends congratulated me for standing my ground. Later, my other family members did the same. That's when I found out my parents had threatened to disown my sister and Bill if they didn't start taking responsibility for their kids. After they paid me back, my mom went to check on them. She told me that my nephews had been completely cut off from video games. All their consoles and even their television had been taken away. They were confined to their rooms, acting rude and miserable, but my sister swore they were finally learning their lesson. Since I had gotten exactly what I wanted, I withdrew my lawsuit. That doesn't change the fact that my nephews will still have to face court for theft. Now, though, they're finally getting the discipline they should have had years ago. I was also promised that they would never come near my house again. From now on, they were either at school or at home, and my house was officially off limits. My sister and Bill are finally being forced to parent the way they should have from the start. And as for the rest of my family, they're completely on my side because my nephews had burned too many bridges with them already. Update 4. First things first, yes. I did install more security cameras. One is right over my shed, so now the entire area is under constant surveillance. I wish I could say my sister Bill and my nephews learned their lesson from all this, but unfortunately, that's not what happened, especially not with my oldest nephew who just couldn't let it go. He wanted revenge, and in the end, he tried to get it. Here's what went down. Each of my nephews got over 100 hours of community service. Since their parents already repaid me, the court process was sped up. They were assigned to picking up trash and working in local parks, under the supervision of a former military officer, so yeah, not fun for them. My oldest nephew was the biggest problem. He refused to cooperate, threw tantrums, and tried to get out of working every chance he got. At one point, his own dad had to be called to the park just to make him pick up a rake. Instead of accepting responsibility, he blamed me for everything. His younger brothers were on his side at first, but as time went on, they started waking up to reality. They realized he was just acting like a spoiled brat. Eventually, they stopped supporting him because they finally understood how wrong they had been. And that's when my sister and Bill turned on me again. They blamed me for the fact that their family was falling apart. But guess what? No one in the family supported them. Everyone saw exactly whose fault it was. With no one to dump the blame on, they became bitter and resentful, shutting down instead of facing reality. Half the family doesn't even talk to them anymore. And then, things got even worse. My oldest nephew, instead of moving on, he did something so stupid that even I have a hard time believing it. He broke into my house. In the middle of the night, he snuck into my home, armed with 2 of his dad's hammers. Update 5. Yes, you read that Reith broke into my house, with 2 hammers, 1 in each hand. The first thing he did was go after my new shed lock. He hammered away at it, but thankfully, it was strong enough to withstand the attack. However, he damaged it so badly that I had to cut it off with bolt cutters later. He also scratched up the shed door with the claw end of the hammer. I woke up to the loud banging and looked out my bedroom window. At first, I didn't recognize him because he was wearing a creepy mask. But when he saw my bedroom light turn on, he grabbed one of the hammers and threw it straight at my window. Glass shattered everywhere. I was barefoot and damn lucky I didn't cut myself. After that, he ran to my back door and started slamming against it with the hammer. He damaged the handle, cracked the window, and left deep scratches on the door with the claw end. At that point, I was genuinely afraid the door wouldn't hold, so I shouted that the police were already on their way. The second he heard that, he took off before they could arrive. The security footage clearly showed that it was him. He might have worn a mask, but his school hoodie and Nike sneakers were easy to recognize. Plus, he left his fingerprints all over the hammer he threw at my window. Since he had already been fingerprinted during his first arrest, the cops had zero trouble confirming it was him. When the police came to arrest him, he denied everything, of course. But the second hammer, the mask, and his clothes were all found in his room. And get this, the mask was from Star Wars, the one worn by Grand Inquisitor. This time, his parents didn't even try to defend him or blame me. They just let the cops take him, despite his screaming and protests. I wasn't there for the arrest, but my sister later told me that he kept switching between crying and yelling. One moment, he was claiming he was innocent, and the next, he was screaming that it was all my fault, and he had to get revenge. The police sent him for a psychiatric evaluation, and they diagnosed him with bipolar disorder. Now, while that does explain some of his behavior, it doesn't excuse it. Once his diagnosis was confirmed, and he was prescribed treatment, he started using it as an excuse. He acted like everyone should pity him just because he was getting help. In the end, he spent a month in juvenile detention before getting sent to a rehabilitation program. He pleaded guilty to avoid a full trial. His sentence? More community service, mandatory therapy sessions, and probation. His dad personally came to my house to fix my broken window and door. He barely spoke to me while working, but he did a good job. Meanwhile, my two younger nephews have completely cut ties with their older brother. Even after all this, my oldest nephew never apologized for what he did. On top of everything, he's repeating a grade in school because his grades are horrendous, and his parents are furious about it. In July, my younger nephews came to my house on their own just to apologize. They admitted they had just been following their older brother, but the punishment they got wasn't worth it. They told me they regret everything and that they miss the fun uncle I used to be. I told them we could start fresh, but they would have to earn my trust. They happily agreed. Meanwhile, my oldest nephew turned 17 a few months ago, but he got nothing for his birthday. No party, no caca-nothing. His parents made it part of his punishment for everything he had done. His younger brother, however, had a birthday a month later and got a brand new mountain bike as a gift. This enraged my oldest nephew. So what did he do? He stabbed the tires with a kitchen knife. That landed him in even more trouble. I know a thing or two about fixing bikes, so I bought new tubes and tires and repaired it for my younger nephew. He was genuinely grateful and thanked me. And then, he tried to run away. Since he wasn't getting any more special treatment, he just walked out, grabbed a bike, packed a backpack full of stuff, and took off. His parents reported him missing immediately, especially after they found his goodbye letter. And in true dramatic fashion, he blamed everything on me and his bipolar disorder. In the letter, he wrote that he couldn't wait until he was 18 to leave, so he was doing everyone a favor by running away now. But after 3 days, he came back. Beaten, with no bike and no backpack. To this day, he refuses to say what happened. Nobody knows who jumped him or what went down, but his dad chewed him out for yet again trying to pin all his problems on me. Update 6. The moment my nephew returned home after his failed runaway attempt, he immediately did what he always does: blame everything on me. Let's get one thing straight. I never forced him to steal from me. I never forced him to break into my house, never made him run away. Every single one of those decisions was his own. He almost ended up back in juvenile detention for violating his probation, but somehow he managed to avoid it again. Now, his life consists of being stuck in his room whenever he isn't at school, doing chores, or attending his mandatory therapy sessions. He completed all of his community service hours, but his probation will last until he turns 18. The court went easy on him because of his bipolar diagnosis, but it didn't excuse him from facing consequences. And trust me, he tried to use his diagnosis as an excuse for everything. But millions of people live with bipolar disorder and never do the things he did. I've been slowly rebuilding my relationship with my younger nephews, but I have no desire to reconnect with the oldest one. And from the way he looks at me, it's mutual. I've only seen him once in the past few months. And when our eyes met, he gave me the kind of pure hatred I've never seen before. He stomped off without a word. Since the school year started, he shut down completely. People say he barely talks, even at school. My younger nephews told me that he's getting bullied now, which I doubt will help him improve. My sister and Bill still aren't on good terms with me, but they can't blame me for any of this. They know this all happened because they failed to discipline their son. Basically, I forced them to start actually parenting for once. They often complain about being tired from work and not having enough time for everything, so every conversation with them is awkward. We don't visit each other, we only see each other at family gatherings, and our mother makes sure we act civilized when we do. That's fine by me. The two younger nephews have earned back most of their privileges. They can watch television and play video games again. But their older brother? Still banned. He's also not welcome at most family events anymore. Recently, I found out that even our parents don't want him at Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve this year because they're tired of his behavior and constant petty theft. And honestly, I get it, but even I think that's a bit harsh. My sister and Bill were furious when they heard about it. They even threatened to boycott the holidays if their son wasn't invited. I don't want him in my house, so I understand why our parents feel the same way, but I don't think cutting him off completely will help. At this point, he has a long road ahead to rebuild trust if that's even possible anymore. Part of me thinks that as soon as he's old enough, he'll try to run away again, unless his last attempt scared him too much to repeat it. Still, I hope things eventually get better for him. I might not like him, but he's still my nephew, and I can't say I don't care at all. That said, there's nothing I can do to fix this. All I can do is stay out of it. Update 7. I wanted to give a more positive update after the holidays, but unfortunately, things haven't improved much. For a while, it seemed like things were starting to stabilize and then everything went downhill again. Right before Thanksgiving, my sister and Bill took their family to Bill's parents' house instead of coming to ours. My oldest nephew didn't behave well there, but at least he didn't cause major trouble, or at least that's what they told everyone. My sister and Bill later had a long talk with our parents, saying that isolating their son wouldn't help his mental health. And honestly, I agreed. At this point, it was obvious that all he felt was hatred and resentment. That kind of emotional state wasn't going to help anyone. Eventually, our parents gave in and allowed him to come to the Christmas Eve gathering. Even though I didn't want to see him, I still got him a gift. Not because I forgave him, but because I wanted to help him, at least a little. At the beginning of December, I went to a thrift store and found a used mountain bike for $30. It needed a few repairs, but it was a solid deal. I also learned that after he ran away, his good backpack got stolen, and he had been using an old beat-up one that originally belonged to one of his younger brothers. So while I was at the thrift store, I found another used backpack for about $5. I fixed up the bike, washed the backpack, and got them ready before Christmas. When I gave him the gifts a few Sundays before the holiday, he looked completely stunned-dazed, if he never expected me to give him anything at all. But he took them, and, surprisingly, he actually thanked me. He immediately started using them, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed genuinely happy about something. Even my sister and Bill were shocked that I not only got him a gift, but actually replaced the things he lost when he ran away. Update 8. After everything the break-in, the hammers, the threats, my nephew still saw me as the villain who ruined his life. But the gifts worked exactly as I had hoped. I stopped being the target of his hatred. Before, he had been desperate to paint me as some kind of enemy, the one responsible for everything bad in his life. But after I gave him those presents, that narrative fell apart. The next time I saw him was at the family Christmas gathering. My sister and Bill forced him to apologize to me, literally hovering over him as he spoke, making sure he did it properly. They kept making him look me in the eye, as he admitted that his arrest wasn't my fault, that he had provoked me, stolen from me, and damaged my property. He promised it wouldn't happen again. We shook hands. He didn't cause any trouble at the party, but his parents never let him out of their sight. They were watching him so closely that they might as well have put him on a leash. It was awkward, but I understood why they did it. They had fought hard to get him invited back for Christmas, and they weren't going to risk anything going wrong. New Year's disaster. And then, on New Year's Eve, things fell apart again. My oldest nephew stole a bottle of champagne from his parents, locked himself in the bathroom, and drank the whole thing before anyone could stop him. Earlier that night, he had asked if he could have some alcohol, and when they told him no, he decided to steal it instead. At first, it seemed like a one-time mistake, but then we learned the truth. He had been stealing alcohol for a long time, even before his first arrest. He had been hiding it somewhere and drinking regularly. His brothers were the ones who exposed him. When they were asked how they got alcohol, they admitted that they had been following their older brother's lead, stealing one can of beer at a time, or pouring hard liquor into separate bottles so no one would notice. And then came the biggest shock: they had been breaking into random houses to do the same thing. They weren't just stealing from family anymore. Their method was simple. They looked for unlocked doors or windows. They avoided houses with dogs so they wouldn't get caught. They only took small things so they could come back later without suspicion. They said that after their arrest last year, they realized that being thieves wasn't actually fun. They had only done it because their older brother did. They had just been copying him. Of course, they got punished for keeping this a secret for so long, but the damage was already done. The rumors spread, confirming what some neighbors had suspected for a while. You'd think that, given how careful and sneaky my nephews had been, they would have at least watched out for security cameras. Maybe they just thought their old uncle would never install cameras. But once they got caught, several neighbors, including mine and my sister's, installed cameras too. February. Another disaster. If the New Year's mess wasn't bad enough, in February, my oldest nephew got into a fight at school. I was told that he didn't start it, the other kid provoked him until they both started throwing punches. But then the real story came out. My younger nephews revealed that before his first arrest, their older brother had been a full-on bully. He was the kind of classic schoolyard asshole that you imagine when you hear the word bully. He stole from other kids. He targeted the smallest and weakest students. He slashed kids' bike tires with a knife multiple times. The kid who beat him up was actually the older brother of one of his past victims. And when he finally got payback, he didn't hold back. He knocked out both of my nephew's front teeth. He broke his nose. My nephew had to be rushed to the hospital, where a maxillofacial surgeon had to reinsert his teeth and wire them in place with braces. His nose had to be reset, and they even put him in a neck brace. For months, he refused to see or talk to anyone. No one pressed charges. Surprisingly, no one filed a lawsuit. Believe me, I asked multiple times why. Apparently, the other kid's parents covered at least half of the medical costs through their insurancer, so they claimed. They just wanted to avoid legal battles. I decided to help cover some of the costs too. I still had the $500 that my sister and Bill had paid me after my lawsuit, so I gave it back to help with the medical bills. I never found out how much the total cost ended up being, but I'm guessing that after everything, my sister and Bill had no savings left. When I saw him again, the next time I saw my nephew after the fight, his face was in awful shape. His teeth were wired together, and he refused to go back to school. He switched to online classes with a school-provided laptop instead. The kid who beat him up only got a 2-week suspension. I won't lie, I was frustrated about that. But at the same time, I get it. My nephew was a bully, and in the end, he got what was coming to him. Final update. What goes around, comes around. It's summer now, and my oldest nephew still spends most of his time locked in his room. Occasionally, he goes out for a couple of hours to ride his bike, but other than that, he keeps his distance from everyone. My sister and Bill have been talking about moving. They want to relocate closer to Bill's parents once their son's probation ends. And honestly, I don't blame them. Almost everyone in the neighborhood hates them. They want to get out as soon as they can afford it, but that might take another year or so. Meanwhile, my relationship with the younger nephews has completely turned around. They've changed a lot, they're more respectful, and they've started visiting me regularly again. Nothing goes missing anymore, and for the first time in a long while, I actually enjoy spending time with them again. We watch movies, play games, and just hang out. They've gone back to being good kids, and they're genuinely trying to make up for their mistakes. As for my oldest nephew, I barely see him anymore, but when I do, he doesn't act cold toward me anymore. One day, he even brought me his bike for repairs. He didn't say much, but he was calm, almost stoic. I know that the moment he turns 18, He's going to leave this place and go as far away as possible. We suggested he enroll in a trade school, and he seems open to the idea. And with that, I think this is where the story ends. Maybe there won't be anything left to update from here on out. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe, leave a like, and have a great day.